If you look at the landscape of high-budget sci-fi games, there is a fundamental design philosophy that just drives me crazy. Mainstream developers are absolutely terrified of letting the player engage with real systemic friction. They hand you an unearned ego right out of the gate. You get a multi-million-dollar suit of armor or maybe an experimental plasma rifle. And the user interface, well, that's designed to convince you that you are an untouchable god. When you strip away the corporate safety nets, you can find a completely different approach to sci-fi game design. So let's look past the modern AAA power fantasies and focus purely on the systems of older titles and indie games. You can see exactly how mechanics shape player immersion. Hello everybody and welcome back to OpenSplit. We are going back into sci-fi games, and this time it's basically about them needing to be difficult. So let's look at 4 completely different games, how they handle this, where they succeed and where they might fundamentally break the fantasy. Okay, if we want to see the absolute pinnacle of this philosophy, I think we can look at Into the Breach. From a pure design perspective, this game is a masterpiece of tactical gameplay. Mechanically, it operates like a high-stakes, explosive chess puzzle. You pilot a giant time-traveling mech sent to eradicate an underground alien swarm of kaijus. On paper, you control the absolute zenith of human engineering, but the game immediately humbles you by weaponizing your own collateral damage. Your actual mission objective isn't just to rack up a high kill count. Mindless violence is a luxury you literally cannot afford. If you fire your devastating weapons, you might vaporize the alien, but the structural blast wave will shatter the civilian infrastructure right behind, the very ones you were sent to protect. The tank was a lie. This single design constraint completely flips standard combat design on its head. Raw damage becomes a trap. You stop shooting to kill and you start using mechanical force just to physically shove an alien one tile away, for example to protect an allied structure. What you have to do is you have to coordinate your attacks to manipulate enemy positioning, tricking monsters into killing each other. And when everything else fails, the system even forces you to deliberately park your multi-million-dollar mech directly in front of an incoming projectile, and you're using your own hull as a human shield. Even though the narrative takes a backseat to the math, the atmosphere feels incredibly immersive because the mechanics, well, they match the desperation of the setting. It proves that a single, well-timed mechanical notch is worth infinitely more than a spectacle of mindless destruction. Hence my fascination with this game. Let's now move on to the second betrayal. This time we are not in a mech, which is big enough, but we are actually in a big spaceship. Well, you can scale this idea up from a micro-tactical grid to a massive macro-strategy level, which is what Crying Suns does. It hands you the ultimate military power trip. You are a legendary admiral commanding a colossal capital-class spaceship. It's a battleship with weapon grids and fighter squadrons at your beck and call. This sounds awesome, doesn't it? Well, the second you sit in that captain's chair, the game aggressively curtails your agency. Your flagship functions less like a proud military asset and, let's say, more like a floating hospital patient with sputtering systems. It goes even beyond that, because fuel is a scarce commodity that turns every single warp jump into a grim gamble. When you send your squads into battle, their fighters can permanently blow into scrap metal, forcing you to meticulously rebuild your military from literal garbage that you scavenge off of dead planets. You see, the logistical misery of choosing which critical ship system to let burn is fantastic friction. For me, sadly, the weight of the story was actually too complete. Once I played through the main narrative, it just felt too much over. It was like this world-altering revelation, and it just ended for me. While the combat felt very engaging in the moment, for some reason it wasn't just memorable enough. What it shows is the raw power of resource friction. It highlights how hard it is to make that friction sustainable over 50 or 100 hours of gameplay. Maybe the game would have benefited from a less complex narrative, a more open-ended world setting, but it was still good in its own way. Then we have also the opposite side of the spectrum. A game that had all the mechanical pieces to be a definitive space RPG, but chose to throw that away. It's probably just me, but I really wanted this to evolve beyond its initial promise, but that was obviously not what Hello Games had in mind. We are of course again talking about No Man's Sky. When it first launched, its initial bones were incredibly compelling. You were handed a hyper-advanced starship, a matter-manipulating multi-tool, and you were set out to explore the endless vasts of this universe. The planets were huge and technically it was very impressive back in the day. The initial survival loop was solid. Your true enemies weren't hostile alien empires but toxic storms, sub-zero radiation and a rapidly depleting oxygen tank. Your multi-tool even was like a fragile lifeline that you constantly had to feed raw carbon, I think, just to keep its basic mining laser operational. This grind is where the problems started for me. While the community had embraced the grind as the core joy of the game, the fantasy of a compelling challenge completely broke for me. A great space game needs to feel like a deep, systemic role-playing game, essentially Skyrim in space. Or that's what we all thought. Instead, the developers made a deliberate choice to never include regular hostile NPCs that you can actually fight on the ground. I still think that's kind of a waste. Well, the game clearly had other goals, and until now I think we haven't really gotten a game like that. This can of course change once the right people get the means to convert passion into a playable sci-fi RPG masterpiece. And yes, I am trashing on No Man's Sky a little here, but let's just move on. With Fallout 4 we have the ultimate paradox, at least in my opinion. It is in its vanilla state, well, it just falls apart. It is a lazy AAA trap where you eventually just become unstoppable, a bullet spongy demigod. And I know it's kind of the trope of Bethesda games that you can't do that, but come on, if you give me a firearm in a first-person perspective, I do not want to argue about RPG stats or arbitrary health bars. If I shoot an enemy in the face, they should drop. It's that simple, and the same goes for my character. The community's realism and survival mods, that's the saving grace here. And it's the only way to play the game. When you inject a real realism mod into the code, it completely fixes the game's structural flaws. Weapons actually work like weapons, lethal, high-stakes instruments, and ammunition scarcity becomes a genuine bottleneck. Simple things like having to eat and sleep, they turn the post-apocalyptic setting into a tangible threat. Well, not really, but at least it makes it more immersive. It appears that Bethesda is like a chef in a kitchen who refuses to put enough salt into the food, and the customers, they have to set up their own salt bar. The chef sees that popularity, but not only does he refuse to change his ways, he also tries to find ways to monetize that. Going back to the post-apocalypse, where the game truly strikes gold, is combining these hardcore survival systems with the amazing base building mechanic. I see a lot of players absolutely hate the repetitive Radiant quests, but hear me out, they completely change the dynamic under a realistic framework. Those Radiant systems, they allow you to completely ignore the more cartoonish 1950s inspired backdrop and purely roleplay as a desperate apocalypse survivor trying to secure a perimeter, which is how I usually try to play the game. Just think about that. Advanced pre-war technology like power armor stops being a casual superhero costume and becomes a heavy physical burden. Finding something as seemingly simple as a fusion core or a tactical mini nuke now introduces a massive weight penalty on your inventory, turning high-tech gear into an expensive resource-hogging liability. The game literally makes you build crude water purifiers out of dirty desk fans and rusty copper pipes, which is just hilarious. It completely rescues the progression curve, proving that players don't actually want effortless dominance, they want to earn their survival through systemic resistance. I am not 100% sure, but I thought the realism mods were usually the most popular ones. We will see what the future brings for the company in question. Now, if only the map were procedurally generated, that would really take the cake. Let's now move on to the payoff. What's the actual takeaway from all of this? If you look back at why games like Into the Breach or modded Fallout 4 stick with us, well, the reason is simple. A perfect tool just solves a problem, but a broken or restricted tool, it can force you to actually engage with the world. So what's the real cost of frictionless design? Because removing every ounce of resistance from a sci-fi game will not make it just easier, it will also remove the world itself. The power fantasy isn't dead because it's no longer fun to feel strong. It's dying because players have started to realize that real strength isn't handed to you in a cinematic intro. It's forged in moments of genuine limitation, whether it's Into the Breach forcing you to protect what you can't replace, Crying Suns turning command into a desperate scramble for scraps, or modded Fallout 4 making every bullet and breath matter. The pattern is clear. True power is measured solely by what you are forced to preserve. Destroying things is easy. Great sci-fi skips the initial godhood. It drops you straight into worlds where tools have weight, choices carry consequences, and every single victory is earned the hard way. Ultimately, the future of the genre belongs to games brave enough to make us feel human. Obviously, for me, as a hardcore roguelike fan, feeling invincible is just a bit lackluster. Great, this basically sums up all my thoughts about the topic friction in sci-fi games, missing friction in sci-fi games, basically wanting to have more difficult games. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel right now, like and share. You can also go ahead and check out my own survival roguelike 3876 AD Corruption on Steam. But with that said, let's meet again in the next one. Bye.